mention all the great commentaries on the Rambam that have been written over the last few centuries. What was that? Why did this new fashion, as it were, enter the Torah world, and to spend more time looking at the Rambam, focusing on the Rambam, writing on what the Rambam wrote? Because that's what happens in the world of Torah study. For a number of generations, a huge number of people are studying the same material, going over and over and over, and eventually everything that you could possibly write has been written about this already, and you look for something new. It's like in the realm of science or other areas of human endeavor. People look for something new where they can make a mark, something which hasn't been done before. So you had people who looked into the Rambam more, you had people who looked into the Tosefta more, and some looked into the Yerushalmi more, something different, something which hadn't really been at center stage for a long time. So this was
So they're doing
it's an important text. No one denies that, but no one was suggesting any kind of new paradigm along the lines that I've been suggesting.
They're just doing it for theoretical knowledge, not for practical application.
It's another text to learn to keep Torah learning interesting and vibrant, perhaps in some way, but because it's new, it's strange. So its very strangeness is its attraction, but it's not part of an overall vision, not part of an overall philosophy. Understand? So therefore, it's not what I'm referring to.
Talking about the non-Jewish world, or who's ever in power, making kind of like making what's accepted and not accepted. I saw an example I just stumbled across it in I think Encyclopedia Talmudica. No, it was the Jewish Encyclopedia, something in English in our shul, a big book, and there was a story about in Rabbi Saadia Gaon's time. There was he had a mahloket with another Gaon about something, and this Gaon wanted him to. I don't know if you're sure. I don't know if you're aware of it, but he wanted to force his opinion on Rabbi Saadia Gaon.
You're referring to Ben Meir, I believe.
I don't know. I just kind of stumbled across the thing, and he wanted him to accept it, and the ruler of the place that I guess in Baghdad or whatever, they were in their caliphate for a while, but he put pressure on him. Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, he said, you can't. The Torah says you don't take shahad, and you can't do it. And eventually somehow it turned out for him. The story ended out well, I guess. I'm just wondering if
your point. I'm not following.
The point is the saying that the outside, who's ever powerful sometimes.
That's always the case. That's just
giving
a fact of human existence. There are always outside forces and powers that be, etc. And they always play a role in human affairs. That should be a given. Any intelligent understanding of human existence and history in general, not necessarily even Jewish, but also Jewish history. Jewish history is also in the same boat when it comes to that. It's no different. There's always political, historical realities and changes and shifts which result in all kinds of new realities, etc., coming into existence. What happens is that if someone without that historical perspective looks at something and says, well, why is it so? And they don't understand it it's for historical reasons and political reasons, as we explained, then they look for other explanations, and then they come up with all kinds of theories which are really extraneous to the matter. They're not really painting the picture as it is. Yes.
The other question that I had was regarding Harambam, where Harambam cites every major ancient Jewish text imaginable, not only the Midrashim, not only all of the Midrashim. I mean, when he's making his halachot, when he's writing his halachot, he's getting his information from a variety of sources, including the Yerushalmi, but he doesn't exclusively use the Yerushalmi. He's using both the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. I don't
and
know.
That's precisely what I'm advocating as well. You didn't hear me say, and no one has ever heard me say, that one should only be using the Talmud Yerushalmi, one should only be looking there, one should ignore the Talmud Bavli. That's a ludicrous suggestion. Anyone who understands anything about Torah knows that's ridiculous. That would never work for many, many reasons. The most obvious reason is that all the Rishonim, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam and the Ramban and Rambam and Rashba and the Rosh, etc., they all, in the first place, deal with the Talmud Bavli and wrote on what they saw there. And if they often also mention, it's true, the Talmud Yerushalmi, but they're coming from in the first instance, they're coming from the Talmud Bavli. In other words, the entire halachic discourse was centered on the Talmud Bavli, and their writings, which are very important to us, without which we cannot possibly study Torah in any kind of depth, without studying the Rambam and the Ramban and the Rashba and the Rashi, etc. Without those texts, we can go nowhere. And no one's suggesting that we ignore those texts. That's an impossibility. What I'm suggesting is that we can and we must study the Torah, come to it with an open mind. And that means studying the Tanakh, of course, and the Mishnah and the Tosefta and both Talmudim, coming to it with an open mind and seeing, for example, if there happens to be a case, and there are such cases, of course, okay, not all the time, but you come across a situation where what the Talmud Bavli says on a certain matter is, shall we say, far-fetched, unlikely. And this shouldn't strike you as something unusual, I'm saying now. The Rambam himself writes this explicitly about certain statements in the Talmud Bavli. And that is why he himself in certain situations deliberately ignores what the Talmud Bavli says, which also, by the way, proves that there's no such rule that you have to follow the Talmud Bavli. If it was a rule, if it was a hard and fast rule, then it would apply to the Rambam as well. Correct? The Rambam can't ignore a rule if it's a rule, but the Rambam does ignore the rule. And he's asked by certain Chachamim, why did you write such and such on this matter, whereas the Talmud said such something else? Or it suggested a certain possibility which you choose not to ignore. And he writes back, he says, because there's shinuyat dehika, which means it's a very far-fetched explanation. And the Rambam's understanding was, and the Rambam's not alone in this, by the way, that such a far-fetched explanation can be overlooked, because he preferred a more straightforward, more reasonable explanation of the matter. So if you're presented with a situation where the Talmud Bavli says something which is very, very far-fetched or very unlikely or very impractical, and the Talmud Yerushalmi on the same issue says something which is entirely practical and much more reasonable and makes more sense in many ways, in such a case I'm suggesting that you can and perhaps should follow the Talmud Yerushalmi rather than Talmud Bavli. But in order to know that, you have to study both. You can't study just the one.
Do you think that well, practically, how would you do it? Would you basically go through the original source, Bavli, Yerushalmi, and Midrashim and things like that, and then see how the Rishonim interpreted each thing, or how, let's say, the Rambam, because we know that the Rambam wrote on everything, how he arranged a certain halacha versus how someone else, what's the process
exactly what you said now. That's the process. That has always been the process. There's nothing essentially so radically new in what I'm suggesting. You have to understand that over the last several centuries, certainly since the advent of the Shulchan Aruch, which is about 500 years ago, Jewish halachic debate essentially became stultified, fossilized, froze. Whereas that was not the case a couple of hundred years earlier, absolutely not. In the same generation, the Rosh could say one thing and the Rashba could say something else, or Rabbeinu Tam could say this and the Rambam could say that. And they're all working with the same sources, but they would understand them differently, they put them together differently, and they would say different things. And they didn't feel that it was necessary that everyone has to agree. If you think differently, and you know what you're saying, you're a Bar Hayim, you're someone who knows what he's talking about. You have to, not only you must express your opinion. You must say what you think is true. You can't just acquiesce to something which is accepted practice if you're convinced it's not true. That was not the opinion, that was not the approach of all the Rishonim, whether it's Rashi or Ramban or the Ramban or Rabbeinu Tam. No one worked in that fashion. The idea that everyone has to accept a certain position because it's written in a certain book in a certain year by a certain Hacham, and for some inexplicable reason, that is now old intellectual debate, old Torah debate is now at an end. This matter can no longer be discussed, can no longer be looked at and examined anew. That is a very newfangled idea in the realm of the study of Torah, and it's a very pernicious idea because it means that truth is no longer the aim of Torah study. The aim of Torah study becomes to know what is done, but not to know whether what is done is correct or why it's correct. Maybe it is correct, but how do you know? If you didn't go into it, you didn't understand all the arguments, all the reasons, all the opinions, then how do you know it's correct? How do you know what's not correct? If we were to, if scientifically we were, in the world of science, if we were in the same position, then we'd all still believe the earth is flat and that it's held up by pillars or elephants or something, as was understood by certain ancient nations and mythologies. And we would believe that the sun revolves around the earth, as Ptolemy thought, as the Rambam also thought, because the entire world, even the most advanced astronomers, like the Rambam in his day, believed that the Ptolemaic system, description of the solar system, of the universe, was correct, and the earth was at the center. If we accepted that position because that's what the Rambam said, or that's what Ptolemy said, or that's what any other number of astronomers believed up till the time of Kepler and Galileo, for example, who discovered that it was not so, and Copernicus. If we were obligated to follow such a methodology in scientific matters, then we would still all believe that the Earth is at the center of the universe. We know that's not true. Because in science, and it's a good thing that it is so, science is based on observation and study and experiment and discovering the truth of things. And if someone wrote, a very important scientist wrote something at some point, which then later becomes apparent is not true. All right, so if it's been proven that it's not true, well, it's not true. Why should Torah be different? Are we to have an open mind and be intellectually alive and interested and honest when it comes to science and all other areas of human endeavor? When it comes to Torah, we're supposed to shut our brains down and have no mind and no capacity for thought and no ability to study the text and know the sources and see what's true and what's not true. So if you can prove, although we're talking about Torah, not mathematics, so you can't prove in a mathematical sense, as the Ramban himself points out in his Hakdamat to Milhamot Hashem. The Ramban with a nun points out that we're talking about Talmud here, not mathematics, and therefore proofs consist not of a mathematical formula which proves that 2 + 2 = 4, but rather showing that a certain position is very, very difficult to maintain given certain other facts of which we are aware, certain other sources, certain other sugyot, certain other quotes, certain other halachic or Torah facts. The more and more far-fetched a certain position becomes, the more you have to go out of your way to maintain a certain position, says the Ramban, the more you must reach the conclusion that opinion is apparently not correct. Because if you can present another possibility, which makes a lot more sense, for which you don't have to bend over backwards in order to make the pieces fit together and for things to come together and make perfect sense, then apparently that's the correct solution. That's what the Ramban tells us. And this is what all great Hachmei Torah have always thought, in all generations, until relatively recent times. Even some of the greatest of the Achronim, speaking of the Shulchan Aruch, said that it's accepted as a general standard, but when you know it's not so, you can differ, and that's what they all did. All the Rishonim, all the Achronim, famous early commentators of the Shulchan Aruch, like the Magen Avraham or the Shach or the Taz, for example, when they were convinced that something was not so, they said so, and they disagreed with the Shulchan Aruch.